Good morning, Rotarians. Good morning. And guests. Well, it's loud this morning. I'm Ron Strobel, the Sergeant at Arms. Our invocation this morning is by Father Joe Boisel.
I'm an Anglican, so we bring a book to pray. Oh my, I get a little feedback here. Today is Veterans Day, of course. My grandfather was, I'm really getting a ton of feedback here, isn't it going? Yeah.
It's going up and coming back down?
It is. My grandfather was a tail gunner in a B-24 during the Second World War, and was shot down and killed in action, leaving my mother and my uncle without their father. My grandmother remarried after the war, married one of the finest men that I've ever known in my life, a great man. Also a veteran of the Second World War. And so there's a great fondness that I have for veterans, and truly thankful for those who have served this country, who have given their lives and have risked everything to defend this country. And so it's with that gratitude this morning that I'm sure you share that we go to prayer. Let's pray together. Bear with me one second because I can almost see. Almighty God, who has given us this good land for our heritage, we humbly beseech Thee that we may always prove ourselves a people mindful of Thy favor and glad to do Thy will. Bless our land with honorable industry, sound learning, and pure manners. Save us from violence, discord, and confusion, from pride and arrogance, and from every evil way. Defend our liberties, and fashion into one united people the multitudes brought hither out of many kindreds and tongues. Endue with the spirit of wisdom those to whom in Thy name we entrust the authority of government, that there may be justice and peace at home, and that through obedience to Thy law we may show forth Thy praise among the nations of the earth. In the time of prosperity, fill our hearts with thankfulness, and in the day of trouble, suffer not our trust in Thee to fail. All which we ask through Your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. You sure it's not the volume, Tom?
It is the volume.
Why don't you just grab the other microphone? Would that help? Would that help, John?
Yes.
Try that one out.
I think the volume was turned up too high. To lead us in the pledge and the four-way test this morning, Jay Yard.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The pledge. First, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? There was a wrinkle in the flag there. I couldn't read it. Nice to be with you.
Thank you, Jay. What a way to inaugurate him just after he's gotten his badge. Lead us in song, Dick Pearsall.
This is Veterans Day. Joe had some ideas of having all these services represented, and he's not here this morning, so I told him in case it didn't matter, I'm going to have everybody sing God Bless America, and we're going to lead you as a veteran, WW2. So let's go. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, build it. to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. 2, 3, 4. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Salute you.
Let's look at the feedback. Yeah, can't you turn the volume down or the gain down or something to stop that? Hello, hello. How's that? Nope, it's not working at all.
Well, you need to turn it up a bit.
Hello. Okay. Don't you love technology? And we'll see how this gentleman does with it. Today, to lead our meeting, President-elect David Basil.
Thank you, Ron. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, David.
First up on today's, or next up on today's meeting is the 3-minute Rotarian, Allison Feaster.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Allison.
Anybody who knows me knows how I really over-prepare to give talks, discussions, things like that. And I have to tell you that I totally forgot that this morning I am the 3-minute Rotarian. But as way of excuse, let me explain that my husband Kent and I have been in Austin, Texas, and Boston for the births of 2 new grandsons. So that, if you remember, and I had conveniently forgot the every 2 hours around the clock. Remember those? So we finally got back, and lo and behold, who decided to come home? Our daughter from Boston with her son, who's now 3 months. And so we have enjoyed this past week more sleepless nights. So the exciting thing for us is that she's here, he's here, we're enjoying it, but boy, life is crazy. Our days are mixed up, and our nights are like days. So the good thing is that we will be heading out to Boston for Christmas with one daughter and flying directly to Tokyo to spend school vacation with our other daughter, who removed our 3 granddaughters. You remember they would come to Rotary? So we're going to go and spend that time with them. So life is crazy, but fun. I highly recommend it. And I love Rotary. It's one of these most satisfying, enjoyable experiences, and I'm so glad to be a part of it. But mostly it's because of all of you. I think about all that we do, but more importantly, it's this camaraderie, it's this club made of fabulous men and women. So thank you, and I'm so glad to be a part of it.
Thank you, Allison. Didn't mean to put you on the spot there. We have to do the next 2 weeks 3-minute Rotarians. If I can get the tin open. Larry Santon for next week. And on the 25th of November, Craig Tallman, will you be here?
No.
Week, right? Yes. John Archer, 25th?
I think so. Let me
Okay.
look down.
Okay. Okay, next up, well, it's Larry Santon time again. Fall fundraiser and Red Kettle announcement.
Good morning, Rotarians. Good morning. I think most of you have seen something like this as what I put together for the previous one. So it's Red Kettle Day time again. It's on Friday, November 27. Here's the sign-up sheet. I'll pass it around. It's really, I think all of you have gone through it, so you know what to do about it. The other piece of my puzzle today is the fundraising, the efforts that we're in, and Tom is going to talk to you a little bit about the importance of the contributions and all that. My role is, as you may recall, is to take in the money and count it and give everybody credit for it. And for that to happen, I really must have one of these sheets and the money, the check, whatever you want to do it, but the two of them together make it really easy. One without the other is a problem because I throw a dart and see who gets the money. So I've got lots of these available. You got them when in your pass out last week. I'll be around later after the meeting. This is really critical, name, your amount, and that kind of stuff, because it allows me to give your team credit for your contribution and also tells us how much money we make at the end of this thing. So I'll be around. I'll pass these around too. And just take one if you need them. There's a couple of dates on them. We were recycling last year's and the year before. So, any questions, thoughts? Okay, Tom, take a minute.
Short but sweet. Schmutz's Schmoozers and Stanton Supercellars are leading the pack. Yes, we got returns already. And next week, I'm going to be calling on the captains, along with Jim Ahern, the captain of the captains, to give us an update. So if you have any questions, get a hold of myself or Larry and sell those roses.
Thank you, gentlemen. Just a couple of notes for the members. We have moved the club website to Club Runner. It's a website platform developed specifically for Rotary clubs, and there will be a welcome email sent to everyone that will give you instructions and help you log on to Club Runner. That's the new location for all of the club information. With that, I'll ask John Archer to come up and introduce today's speaker. John?
Good morning, Rotarians. How is everybody today?
Morning, John.
Let's get it going. Let's get excited. I wrote a few things down because I wanted to introduce our speaker and say all the wonderful things that he did. One of the things that I did have to break to him this morning, though, is that after, 5 or 6 emails about that flash drive, there is no audio visual today, so that was all for naught, but I think he will persevere. I want to introduce Chris Ronayne. He's the president of University Circle, Inc. UCI is a nonprofit community service corporation responsible for the development, service, and advocacy of University Circle. I'm sure all of you have been to University Circle and to see all the wonderful attractions and institutions that they have. I know Chris terms that EDS, Meds, and Arts, and he's going to touch on that today. In addition to that, before Chris joined UCI, he served the city of Cleveland as the city's planning director, chief development officer, and chief of staff. And he was the chief architect of the city's waterfront district plan, an effort to reconnect the people of Cleveland to Lake Erie. In addition, Chris serves on the Port Authority of Cleveland. He's the chair. I know about this organization. Our former managing partner, who unfortunately passed away last year, was the prior chairman of the Board of Trustees. The Port is a tremendously important group in Cleveland and fosters job creation and economic vitality throughout greater Cleveland. The name of Chris's talk today is Transforming Cleveland One Neighborhood at a Time. I know that not all of you have the ability to get up to Cleveland all the time, so when Chris and I spoke about what he was going to talk about today, I thought it would be great if he would provide an overview of all the wonderful things going on in the city, especially in light of the RNC coming next summer. So I think he'll touch on a number of different topics, not only with UCI, but also the connectivity of the various neighborhoods and the growth of some of those neighborhoods. So without further ado, please give a warm round of applause to Chris Ronay.
Thank you, John. Good morning, Rotarians. Good morning. It's good to see you. I've had the chance to speak with other Rotarian groups around Northeast Ohio before, but I've not been out here to Laurel Lake and Hudson. So thanks for the invitation today. And I do sometimes rely on this audiovisual as a crutch for this talk, but I will say to you, if you're interested and if this ultimately is repaired someday, I will come back and give it to you again and show you some of the visuals, because some of them are pretty compelling about what's transforming Cleveland. I want to congratulate both your president and mayor-elect, David Basil. So congratulations. You're going to be a busy man coming up here. Wow. No rest for the weary, huh? And to John, thank you for the invite. We do have mutual connections through his firm and the good work of your firm, which I'm going to elaborate a little on as we talk about the RNC. But I'm also just glad to be here as a fellow friend in Northeast Ohio to talk to you a little bit about what is transforming Northeast Ohio. And maybe we can have a little bit of a Q&A and dialogue after these remarks. What I will just elaborate, I guess, I'll give you my 3-minute bio as it relates to what I'm about to talk about. And then I want to talk really about 3 major initiatives happening in what's transforming Cleveland. I did have the pleasure to serve as a city planning director in the early years of the 2000s. And it was a great job because we were, as a Cleveland community, working very much on a restoration of a relationship with our waterfront. It's something that, as you know, as you travel in the center city of Cleveland up to downtown, we could do better in terms of our relationship with our lake. And I'm sure in your travels to cities like Chicago and elsewhere, you've seen a better relationship with a Great Lakes city with its lake. So I spent a lot of time working on that. I want to talk about what's actually come to fruition and partly as a result of that. I also want to talk a little bit about what is happening with visitor infrastructure. Wearing one hat, yes, I do chair the Port Authority, and so there is a extremely important waterborne relationship with the port, and I'll talk about that. But I also want to talk just generally about what is happening with visitor infrastructure and why we as a community in Cleveland were able to land the RNC. And then finally, I want to open it up to University Circle, which is the other big hub from downtown, which is really churning out an incredible job picture these days. And that's where I have the pleasure and have had the pleasure for the last 10 years to work. My wife is also a worker in University Circle. She's been heading up the Cleveland Botanical Gardens for the last decade. So we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the institutions there. Maybe just to reverse that order for a minute and explain a couple of relationships with Hudson. One, we have a very direct relationship with my organization with this institution right here. We have set forth on a distance learning program where when people can't always necessarily get to the new exhibits, but I would highly recommend you to get, if you can get over to the Cleveland Museum of Art, for instance, and see the wonderful new exhibit featuring Monet and others. If folks can't get there, we've created a distance learning program, and one of our host sites is right here at Laurel Lake. So we're working with active seniors and sort of working with curators to telecommute exhibit information right into this facility, and then eventually we sometimes do commute people back to the exhibit. It's an exciting connection with you guys. On a much more historic scale, we in University Circle owe you a lot here in Hudson, and I'll tell you why, and I think you may, some of the historians of your own town know why. It was back in the 1880s when a Massa Stone was convinced that we needed a university in the University Circle area that would match the Case Institute of Technology, which had come from downtown. And that industrialist, Massa Stone, pulled Western Reserve from here in Hudson to University Circle. And I see one gentleman in the back knows that story well. Anyways, we have the benefit of Western Reserve University now as a part of the affiliated Case Western Reserve University. It was a rocky relationship at the beginning. Both Case, Leonard Case, whose brother William Case was the mayor of Cleveland, had somewhat of an industrial sparring partner in Massa Stone. They didn't always see eye to eye. So Stone put Western Reserve University right next to Case, and the two of them built a fence between the universities. But it took about a century to federate as one university, but they one wasn't always seeing eye to eye with the other. anyways, we owe you for that university, so thank you. And I know some of the streets here still reflect the nomenclature of the university itself. All right, let me take a few minutes to talk about what's transforming the city, and particularly I'll start with the downtown. You know, downtown, we get a lot of requests from other cities to talk about what Cleveland's doing. And so for that, I feel that we all ought to share some civic pride that other cities are calling upon us to figure it out, to figure out how to transform a city that really hit the bottom and it's starting to look up and it's climbing back up. I've recently personally been invited to the city of Detroit. Yesterday I was in the city of Toledo, and about 2 weeks ago I was in the city of Albuquerque. And all of them are asking, you know, how do we refurbish our downtowns? And there's no one single bullet to it, but I will tell you by the numbers, something we've done right is we've restored, or actually addressed a new resident population downtown. Actually, Cleveland, unlike some of the cities that you know well, Philadelphia, New York, others, who always had resident population downtown, we didn't have that. You know, we were a commuter town from the beginning with businesses principally, you know, populating the central business district. But in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a bit of sort of a tipping of the toe in the water when some of our warehouses, as you know, in the warehouse district, were beginning to see residential interests, and some builders took some historic tax credits and converted these buildings for residents. And that has really mushroomed. And particularly, I think you can owe your children and your grandchildren, in some cases just friends, the millennials. Millennials have shown up downtown and said, we want to live here. We like the hustle, bustle, vibrancy of a place that really has a verve to it. And we have reached a point now where we're over 15,000 residents living downtown. I was recently on the Green Line, which is the free trolley coming from the NCAA. This was back in the NCAA championship around last March, and I was on the Green Line. And there were a couple of gals on the Green Line with me. We were passing through Public Square, and a woman said, I can't believe this. This isn't Cleveland. This isn't the Cleveland I know. And I looked over and I said, ma'am, but it is Cleveland, you know? And really, what's really driving that more 24/7 energy is the fact that our young folks have really found their way downtown. It's not only the young folks. Empty nesters are starting to live the dream downtown, townhomes and apartments and others. And it's given a certain vitality that I think is very important to the idea that you can have the energy of a visiting downtown that's also a resident downtown. And what is really reflective, I think, of the progress is, as many of you know, read or visited, a new downtown Heinen's. And that only has happened, and I courted Jeff Heinen's when I was at City Hall for years to get them to locate in the neighborhood. When a grocery store enters a picture, you usually see that there's a significant sign of residential life. And the new Heinen's, which is a part of the retrofit of the old Ameritrust Rotunda, 9th and Euclid, now called the 9, is a picture of a promise for a downtown residential neighborhood. Next door, Charlie Geiger, formerly, well, not formerly, his headquarters in the city of Lakewood, Geiger's clothing store is locating right next door. So to have a sports apparel store right next door to the Heinen's is really showing that you're actually beginning to have a real village in the downtown. So it's exciting. And as that happens, visitors are starting to show up. Obviously, you know the Arena District, the 4th Street District, and all of that has a real visitor appeal to it. It is part of why I think we helped sell the RNC, which I'll come back to in a minute. But that downtown is starting to see population, and it's really exciting. So what do we do when we start seeing a resident population in the downtown? And some of the images I might have shown you is one big play that we're going to exercise is the transformation of Public Square. Public Square was for years, it first started out when Moses Cleveland came to the city of Cleveland vis-a-vis the Connecticut Land Company and started surveying the lands at the Cuyahoga River and the lake. They really platted out a town that was reminiscent of New England, Connecticut, right? Town square, and sort of took themselves away from the waterfront, sort of located around the town square. For years, it was very pastoral. In fact, for some period of time, it was farming in nature. By the way, the Old Stone Church, which is the oldest church now in the city, is my church, and Hiram Hayden was working with Amasa Stone to bring Case over to University Circle. But there was a church, there was a sort of pastoral landscape, and there wasn't much else. As things went by and time went by, it became really a transit hub, and it really kind of as a transit hub has functioned pretty well, but it is one that has not had a whole lot of sort of human scale to it. But as the downtown is now becoming a resident place, people are calling for a park. And actually, for a period of time pre-1900, it was the only real sort of park setting in the city of Cleveland until University Circle started to grow out, and Rockefeller gave us Rockefeller Park, and Wade gave us Wade Park and University Circle. But it was the big city park back when. 100 years hence, it's going to be the big city park again. And I think if you travel other cities, I keep referencing different cities that have done it right, Pioneer Square in Portland and elsewhere, you need a town center. You know that well in Hudson. Cleveland needs a town center. It's a place where I, as a high school kid, actually sold ice cream down in the public square. And I saw all kinds of passersby, commuters, and so on, but everybody was always walking through and nobody was ever sticking around. So we are going to transform Public Square as a great community space. Let's put a lot of money into it, and part of it is to really appeal to the visitors who are coming, but also create a nice residential setting. Daniel Burnham was asked in 1903 by then Mayor Tom Johnson and the governor of the state of Ohio to come in and plat out a great civic district. Daniel Burnham put together, and again, an image I might have shown you is his 6 or 7 classical buildings on the mall that you might know as Mall A, B, and C right outside Key Tower. And those malls have really served us pretty well over the years as sort of a government center, county courthouse, federal courthouse, city hall, county administration building until its new location went to 9th and Prospect. But the malls were fine, sort of classical in nature, but somewhat lifeless. What you're going to see down at the center core of downtown are 2 new hotels. One is about to open in conjunction with the new convention center that we've put a lot of money toward, and the Globe, which is the other name for the Medical Mart next door. But we've built the visitor infrastructure for our oncoming conventions. So one hotel, the Hilton, on the west side of Mall B, and another hotel, the Drury, on the east side of Mall A. All right, you've got this great green space down just off of Public Square. But as Burnham had envisioned, how will we ever get to the lake? And Burnham, Daniel Burnham, the great architect planner who planned the city of Chicago's lakefront, came to Cleveland and said, you need to get to that lake. He had planned for a great rail station to be at the terminus, the North End, where essentially the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is today. The rail station, as you know, I shouldn't use the word, but it was sort of, the concept was hijacked. It was hijacked by the Van Swearingen brothers, who owned the real estate of what we know today as Terminal Tower. The Vans wanted to build the rail lines out to the Heights, particularly Shaker Heights, and they brought the Burnham vision that was to have that rail station out on the lake back to what is today Terminal Tower. Okay, so a different twist on history occurred, but what we lost was that vision to connect down to the waterfront, right? Because we settled for the rail station to go at Terminal, and at the end of the terminus at Mall C, between City Hall and the County Courthouse, you can look to the lake down toward the stadium and toward the Rock Hall, but you can't get there. So what you've perhaps read about is a great plan to connect that waterfront from the malls and actually bring downtown traffic down to the waterfront vis-a-vis a cable stay suspension bridge that is being designed by a world-class bridge designer, Miguel Rosales. This will begin to complete the visitor picture from where a resident visitor might come in out of the Tower City terminal, maybe from the airport through the Red Line, through a brand new public square, through the mall, out toward the lake, and really, really creating the visitor infrastructure that Cleveland's been planning for. Those are big, big, big swings at the bat, right? But I think for reasons that are obvious, we're trying to make a city that actually has a downtown population, has a better humanized scale of parks in the city, and connects to the waterfront. I'm excited about that. I've spent a lot of time as the city planning director working on that plan, and 10 years hence it's coming to fruition. Let me talk about a different aspect to our waterfronts for a minute, and that's obviously Lake Erie and our relationship with it, but from a commerce standpoint. I think the beauty of Cleveland is it's not a sort of one way of doing thing. What we have is a beautiful thing about our town is we're a mosaic of a lot of different things that make up our town. And our waterfront isn't going to just be a park-like waterfront. It is going to be a bit more residential in nature. Down by the 25 acres in front of the Cleveland Browns Stadium, now First Energy Stadium, there will be new housing, new retail, new restaurants opening up, all by next year, some of them, by the way, by next year. And that's a developer by the name of Richard Pace who's developing the harbor front. And there's a new transient marina down there. So a lot is happening. If you've been out to Baltimore, you know the Baltimore Harbor, kind of a mix of uses. That's what you're going to see in the downtown. And it's what we've been working at for 20 years. Meanwhile, the Port of Cleveland is starting to act like a port. And my great predecessor, Mark Krantz, deserves a ton of credit, John, for helping cast the die. Corman Jackson Krantz, Krantz in the name, was my preceding chairman of the port. He and the current CEO of the port had an interesting vision. It was whether or not we could actually start being relevant as a trans-Atlantic shipper. Could Cleveland ship goods to Europe? And we found a partner, and we've cultivated that relationship for a couple of years. Heretofore, the port has really been a port of entry for raw materials. We still make steel in Cleveland, unlike the city of Pittsburgh, who steel is only in the name of the football team. But we do, with ArcelorMittal, have still, in fact, a very high functioning, one of the world's most efficient steel mills, just about 4 miles up the river in the Cuyahoga. But the port heretofore has really still been, for all these years, a port of entry for raw materials, iron ore that comes up from the Mesabi Range of Michigan and Minnesota and comes down through the Great Lakes, and we ship that iron ore to our steel mills, and then we ship out the steel. That's great. But what we want is a bit more export business. And so we took a chance on a cargo container business that we call the liner service. The liner is a direct line to Antwerp, and our partners in Belgium and the Netherlands, we've brokered a relationship with a company called Splitoff, and they're in multiple countries in Europe. But our port of entry is Antwerp, and what we are doing is we are moving goods in container fashion through the Great Lakes. And what is this, might you say, what is a liner service? Well, for one, goods move in a lot of different ways. They move by truck, they move by air, they move by rail, but can they move by ship? Well, when they move by ship, it meets triple bottom line interests. It is the most affordable way to transport goods, and it is the most environmentally friendly way to transport goods. We're finding that we are now competing with the Atlantic coastal ports because we can get goods out of Cleveland, out of the Midwest, up the St. Lawrence and to the Atlantic and overseas just as fast as Baltimore and New Jersey and points elsewhere on the Atlantic seaboard can. Why? Because trucks queue up in a lot of traffic. It's not that they can't get the ships out, it's that they can't get the goods from the trucks to the ships because there's a whole lot of queue time happening in the Atlantic seaboard. So Cleveland found a competitive niche, and we are now a global player. And we are moving goods out the Atlantic vis-a-vis the seaway. We are now a global Cleveland, and I think the port's kind of put us on the map in that regard. So I'm very excited about that. That's a hat I wear as chairman of the port. I want to talk to you for a minute now about visitor infrastructure. We've talked a little bit about the downtown, a little bit about what's happening in the waterfronts. Why did the RNC choose Cleveland? And I'll get to University Circle as the end line, and I do say we were one of the closers on the team to pitch the city of Cleveland to the RNC. Whether it was the RNC or whether it was the DNC, from Cleveland's visitorship, no matter. We wanted people here in restaurants, we wanted media attention on Cleveland, we wanted heads in beds, and we wanted people coming to Cleveland. And we pitched a bid for both, and we were lucky to get the RNC. And I had the good fortune, I will once again, I'm not just here as John's commercial today, but his firm has been vital in the interest, and your colleague John Pinney worked with the Destination Cleveland Board to put the bid package together. And we've been lucky as a town to be discovered. And I think this RNC is a game changer for us because what will happen, in addition to the delegates coming from 50 states, and that's important to us, is 15,000 members of the media. 15,000 members of the media will be in Cleveland in July next year. That is only rivaled by the Olympics. And we are ahead of the Super Bowl. We are the #2 in terms of media visits to a city when a big event happens, only next to the Olympics. So this is a game changer. It's an opportunity to show off our city, and everybody's scurrying. The mayor has this idea of no more orange barrels. We'll all love that when that's a reality. But when that happens, we want our city to show off well, right? But the precursor to that is, how did we show our city last year when we courted the RNC? Well, we took a trip. I'll just sort of enter the picture where I entered the picture. I went and picked him up downtown, and we brought him out to University Circle up the Health Line. And let me bring you on a quick virtual tour of the Health Line and sort of interweave our pitch to the RNC with what's happening in that corridor from downtown to University Circle. There has been a game changer in, Cleveland. It was a streetcar community, like most of the legacy cities in the East and the Midwest, just about out to Cleveland or maybe Chicago, but everything to the east was a streetcar city, right? Well, we, with some regret, I think, sold our trolleys off to Toronto in 1954, and I think we regretted it ever since because we immediately scurried and started planning for subways or above-ground rail or anything we could do to replace the mistake that we had made by selling off our streetcars. Well, we finally did it. We finally, in the late 90s, went down to Curitiba, Brazil, and we found a product that acted like rail but had the flexibility of a bus. It's called Bus Rapid Transit. It is the hub of downtown connecting to University Circle, 4.5 miles, and another mile east into East Cleveland. And that is what we put $200 million of your federal tax dollars into. But what we yielded was $6 billion in investment in the corridor, a 30-to-1 private investment on every dollar of public money we put into this. We were a pilot, and that health line has worked. It has restored the energy and the vitality of the old streetcar corridor that was Euclid Avenue. One by one, building by building, block by block, from the old arcade all the way out to University Circle, you're seeing a major resurgence. And again, it's $1 billion a mile as you go. So we got on the health line, a special designated health line bus for the RNC delegates, and this was the site selection committee chaired by Enid Michelson out of Utah. And we got on and we started telling the story about what Cleveland was. What it was the home of millionaires, right? It was the highest concentration of millionaires on any main street in America. It was John D., who lived at 40th and Euclid, right next to the mayor of Cleveland, William Case, who lived right next to Henry Flagler, who was his business partner. From Rockefeller to Flagler to Charles Brush, who developed the first electric wind turbine and perfected the idea of arc welding and created the first outdoor public lighting on Public Square, and then made a mint because he sold public lighting and street lighting all over the world, from Cleveland to Paris and everywhere else. There were inventors, the Wades, who started Western Union Telegraph, and still today the company is still in existence. He was the early pioneer of the early internet, if you will, the underground cabling that moved information from point to point. These were the people who built Cleveland. The RNC was somewhat interested in the name Sylvester Everett. It was a man who made a lot of money in industry and banking, had a home on Euclid Avenue that he reserved only for U.S. presidents to stay in a certain bedroom when they visited his home on Euclid Avenue. That's the popularity. The Hannahs, who Teddy Roosevelt said you had to pass through the Hannah and get the stamp of approval from a Hannah, especially on the Republican side, if you were ever going to win a presidential election, Hannah being one of McKinley's good friends and cabinet members. These were the Clevelanders that built Cleveland. But the point of context as we rolled on through Euclid Avenue with the RNC was that these builders of Euclid Avenue, these millionaires of industrial might, also left philanthropy to University Circle. It's what built our cultural district, which today is celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Cleveland Museum of Art. When there was hatched a vision by a couple of industrialists who said, let us build this museum in the park, Wade being one of them, Wade said to the city of Cleveland, I'll give you the land if you'll build a museum to be forever free to its people. That became the wonderful Cleveland Museum of Art. The first director of the Museum of Art, a guy named Frederick Whiting, in 1916 said, you know what, it's not enough to just have a single museum in the park. What we need is a collection of museums to be really globally relevant as one of the best cultural districts in the world. So he called for the future site of Severance Hall, the future site of the Museum of Natural History, the future site of the Cleveland Botanical Garden, the Historical Society, the Cleveland Institute of Art. And one by one, the industrialists who were making their money on all the companies I mentioned gave their money philanthropically to build a city so their children didn't have to go east to go to college, so they didn't have to leave the city for great medical care, so they didn't have to go to Carnegie Hall to hear a great concert. They could see it right at what was the future Severance Hall. This is what we stopped in on with the RNC. We took a turn on East Boulevard. We heard a great Star-Spangled rendition of just a great organist piece at Severance Hall. They sat down. They loved the great Severance Hall that John Severance built with the ceiling emblematic of his wife's wedding dress. His wife had passed away. Very romantic gesture, but that's Severance Hall. We hopped on to the Cleveland Botanical Garden. It was a great sunny night in Cleveland, and took in the 10-acre expanse, the former site of the Cleveland Zoo, which is now the Cleveland Botanical Garden, on Wade Oval. they wanted to get back on the bus to go from the Botanical Garden to the Museum of Art. For any of you intimately familiar with University Circle, you'll know that that's all of about 100 yards. So we said, hey, forget that, let's walk. So we took a walk with the dozen delegates from the RNC. By the time we got to the front door of the Cleveland Museum of Art, before she even went in, Enid Michelson said in front of about a half a dozen live television cameras, "We love Cleveland." And she said, I love this. She said, "We love University Circle." But what I thought is she going to say, and we're coming here with the RNC? She had 3 other cities to visit. We were actually the first of the 4 finalists for their visit. So we walked inside with the delegation and a number of folks from around Cleveland. And one of the gentlemen who's a delegate from Arkansas, got to talking with him. Of course, had to ask the question, do you know Sam? He said, oh, Sam's an old buddy. Sam was an old buddy. My name is Sam Walton. And these are the sort of, at their echelon, the players in the RNC, right? But he said, you know, I bet I can't get a good margarita here in the Museum of Art. I said, I bet you can. So we got him a quick, good margarita. We wanted to hear more about what he thought about the town, more importantly. And he said, you know what about your town? Your town's on the same page. He says, I know without even yet going there that other cities won't be able to say the same. He did know, and he said to me, he said, in Dallas, which was their next visit, there's a certain sports owner who's pulling the town apart, literally and figuratively. He said, not your town. You're on the same page. You're on the same page. Well, lo and behold, about 3-4 weeks later, we get the call. We had won the RNC bid. And I think it is sort of typifying, again, whether it was the RNC, whether it was the DNC, whether it was another delegation coming to Cleveland to explore what we're doing, it shows a city on the move. It shows a city that is really intentional about its own transformation. It shows a city that took those legacy assets from the industrialists who built the city a century ago. And we are not the 5th largest city in the nation as we were at the turn of the 20th century. We today are about the 40th largest center city. But as a region, we're still pretty relevant here as a 3 million person region. And I love the regionalization that's working with between Hudson and Cleveland and everywhere else, that we're actually, I hope we keep that going, that we're really one city, we're a regional city. But as you look over this town, I think the town is taking the best of what it had when it was the 5th largest city in America. And as a mid-sized city with big city assets, it's leveraging them to be the best mid-sized city it can in its class. And I think that's what people are discovering. The downtown is returning. Young people are exploring their city again, and they're enticing their parents and grandparents to come back and explore it. We're making connections that we wanted to make 50 or 100 years ago and we didn't make. We're using the asset base from 100 years ago to leverage a new future. And it's an exciting time in Cleveland, Ohio. I think I meet with a lot of people. I meet with Rotarians. I meet with other groups all about town. Some of the more exciting meetings I have are with college kids about junior, senior year in college, looking actively when they leave college to come back to their hometown. And that's exciting. So we network and we talk about job opportunities. But that's an indicator, because when I graduated from college in 1990, everybody was flying to Chicago, or they were going off to Pittsburgh, or they were going to New York or somewhere. They weren't necessarily saying, I'm coming back to my hometown. Something's happening here that's bringing them back to their hometown. It's exciting and it's fun to see the transformation. So I talked just about a slice of Cleveland, from about a 4-mile square area from Public Square to the waterfront to University Circle and Euclid Avenue. But you can writ large take that out and say it's happening all over town, both in the center city and the suburban areas around the region. It's exciting to see things coming back. I could tell you a lot of stories about companies that are trying to migrate back. You know, our 2 largest employers today in the city of Cleveland are the Cleveland Clinic and University Hospitals, and it's all about the migration of firms around the tech center and the innovation district. People want to be around the Cleveland Clinic and University Hospital. So we are actively right now, IBM just bought a health records management company called Explorus, which is located in the city, and they're trying to find a way to locate right around the Cleveland Clinic. Those are our big new drivers in the new economy of Cleveland. Wherever healthcare goes, and we know it's always ever changing, and there's been a lot of changes to it recently, we built a platform for civic innovation and for particularly med tech innovation. And we're building a town that is sort of rethinking itself, and it's exciting to see it. So my focus today has been on visitor infrastructure, the transformation on Euclid Avenue and University Circle. But again, writ large around the region, there are people doing things in new ways that are really recasting the city as it was a century ago as the innovation center, I think, hopefully, of the Midwest and hopefully in America. Thank you very much, and I could take some questions if you had them. I appreciate the time. Questions, and I also say to you, if any of you are ever interested in coming up and taking a tour around our area, we'll gladly give you that tour, you or a group of you.
Hello, I'm wondering, and it's probably an aside, whatever happened in Tower City?
Yeah. You know, good question. About Tower City, a number of things. One, we, as we know, the terminal was the terminal and is still the terminal. It's still a hub. There will be, actually, back to my Burnham point, there will be some, probably around 9th and Euclid, some more transportation, new assets. I think Amtrak, the station that's really, not in the state we want it to be. I think we're going to rebuild a transportation hub around 9th and Euclid. So where does that leave Tower City? Well, it's still the cross confluence of the RTA lines. And actually, interestingly, in hub and spoke, with the hub being the downtown and the spokes, we are making new investments in transit. I mean, we've got 2 new stations in University Circle in the last 2 years, which is great. And I think because we're becoming increasingly international in University Circle with researchers and eds and meds workers, they're used to doing that. But to your point about Tower City, Ruth Ratner Miller in the 90s really led the charge to refurbish Tower City. And it had a glory day. I mean, when you had the best of retail outfits in the terminal. Unlike the city of Columbus, we haven't closed yet. Columbus had the Center City retail outfit that is now actually no longer in use as a downtown set of stores. We are still in business at Tower City. But what is, I don't know if it's yet public, and I don't know if there's anybody in the media in this crowd here, but my understanding is, and maybe it was published, I was out of town last week, that Dan Gilbert's at least bought or has put a bid out to buy a part of Tower City. I think that's a good thing, seeing what Gilbert's doing in Detroit. Gilbert is, as we all know, he's the owner of the Cavs, but he's the owner of Quicken Loans. He did invest in a major office here in downtown Cleveland with his Quicken Loans outfit. But in Detroit, he has made a huge civic statement, and he is, this sort of new class of business boosters that are really trying to leverage the civic rebirth. I think that's a good sign of things to come. If Gilbert himself showed an interest in the terminal, it's not all going to be a casino. It shouldn't all be a casino. It ought to have some other animated life to it. It is, as office space goes above, it is, in that it's entering that sort of, I don't know, Class B zone, but the office space is kind of getting dated, so it's going to need a refurbishment. And I think if you have somebody of the means of Gilbert entering the picture, that's a good thing. Sir?
Great talk. Thank you so much for that. All of us who have suffered with Cleveland sports for so many years are longing for a winner. But in a real sort of economic sense, how much would a championship in any sport, particularly in the one that plays in the autumn, how much would that bring to the city?
Yeah, I mean, I so much appreciate your point. I say sometimes on my talk to the college students, I say, you can go back to college in the fall, and while that kid from Pittsburgh's gonna, sort of needle you on the Pittsburgh Steelers, they don't have the Cleveland Orchestra, they don't have the Cleveland Museum of Art. And we do give that line. Now, I'll grant you, that's a stretch for a college kid, right? It's still all about the sports infrastructure. But I will say, in Cuyahoga County, there was a issue 8 passage of the Arts and Culture levy, and it turned out that arts and culture puts twice the amount of money back in multiplier effects into the local economy as sports does. So you got to keep that in mind, of where sports is relative to other things that make the visitor infrastructure go. All this said, there's no question that when you're broadcast on national, and as I experienced, I was in Guatemala last week and watched the Browns on Thursday night from a Browns backers bar in Guatemala. How do you find one of those, right? They're everywhere, and we've got to get that win. And I mean, I think we've got to get over the hump. To me, it's another, it is a emotional, thing for us, but it is something that the world is watching, and I think the world wants to see. I think people actually sometimes are rooting for the underdog, which we've become. But it's got to help us. I mean, on pure economics, when the first ball was pulled to LeBron James Phase 1 here in Cleveland, I mean, immediately the Plain Dealer did the economic, reports on what this means for Cleveland, and immediately, there's millions of dollars that are helping Cleveland because of the initial draft of him, or pulling that ping pong ball. Because the restaurateurs, the hotels, they knew they were going to get a big uptick. When he came back, again, all good. And the prospects of the playoffs, literally in financial terms, my partner Dave Gilbert over at the Sports Commission will tell you on any given playoff night, it's X hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to the city of Cleveland. So in pure economics, it's huge. But more, I think, that brand of the city, you got to get a win. having said that, I was born in the city of Chicago. My grandmother was a Cubs fan. My Uncle Elmer was a Cubs fan. My dad became a Sox fan because he did everything counter to what his mom wanted to do. But I grew up kind of a Cubs fan, and I was still rooting for him for my 93-year-old Uncle Elmer because he hadn't had that win yet. Chicago's done fine, even though the Cubs haven't won it. Now, granted, the Blackhawks, the Bulls, and the Sox have won it, but towns still do all right. I mean, Boston, prior to, the end of the last century, had a long dry spell, too, So you can still have that civic rebirth without the win, but I think it helps. Yeah.
Question about the waterfront. If Baltimore is a role model for us, that'd be awesome. That's a great one.
Certainly at the harbor, and the original harbor planning was done by the same firm that did the Baltimore Harbor.
Question, though, on the topic comes up all the time, Burke Lakefront.
Yeah.
Can we do everything we need to do on the waterfront without keeping that an airport?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a couple of things on that. When I was a planning director, we had to wrestle that one down, and there's a long history to it. One, we saw the same thing I think you just said, is, my gosh, it's 500 acres of lakefront land, and so we started exploring uses. The one thing, we started the waterfront plan in 2002, which was just on the heels of 9/11, and the FAA was not going to give up reliever airspace given what had happened at 9/11, and they didn't want to give, but they offered some permitted co-locational uses. One of which is you can use them for tree farms and things of a sort of agriculture nature. You can also use them for golf courses, which is interesting. So at one point in the plan, we actually had the PGA out to look at a links course on the east end of the Burke. The plan that we ultimately conveyed, which I had a slide of, I could show you some other day, was actually a perimeter development on the south end and a park on the north end. You could still have air traffic. There is new air service actually out of Burke, interestingly. But that being said, I'm a believer that Burke in time should convert for public use. I had the pleasure to tour Mayor Daley around Cleveland twice when he came here with U.S. Conference of Mayors, and just on his own sort of recon visits, he was a student of cities, and that's what a great mayor always is. They study cities and study other places. But he came in, and I walked down 9th Street because I was walking him to the Rock Hall, and he looked over, and he said, "You should get rid of that." He said, and no politic here, he just said, "That's corporate welfare," which was interesting because it was just a few planes coming down, and I was starting to take notes as as if I was working in his city. But he did it with Meigs, and when he did it with Meigs, he did it in honor of his wife's interest, who really was a naturalist. Maggie Daley has since passed on, but she was his real conscience, and he did it with Meigs, and after he did it with Meigs, Congress created an act such that no mayor could ever do that again without the proper authorities. He had paid down the bonds methodically. He had gotten it ready. And he said when all was said and done, he got a visit from Harrison Ford to his office. And he said, Harrison Ford came in and said, "Mayor, you got rid of my airport." And he looked over at me and he said, "Hollywood." But anyways, I think a leader will see in the future that ought to be a civic space. And we've got other reliever airports, be it Lost Nation or County or others, that could provide the same source. I've flown in there once on a private airplane, and the pilot said it's the worst place for us to fly in, and they took me to Hopkins to drop me off. So I think it's a matter of time. The one thing I'll say, and I'm sorry I'm going long on this, but it's been a passion for me, I do think the downtown on every available buildable lot ought to get built out. So there's kind of we don't sort of bleed ourselves too far away from the core. So in time it'll happen. One more? Nope, we're out of here.
Very
it's been my pleasure, yeah.
I've read that University Circle was named for a streetcar turnaround. Is that a
Yes, correct. I'll leave you on that. University Circle is known as the place where the trolleys circled at the university at 107th and Euclid, and we have a development about to happen, a 20-story apartment tower that we demanded that the developer respect the contours of the original circle, so it'll have this sort of curvilinear shape to it to respect the original circle. Come see us in University Circle. I appreciate the time today. Really a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Really has been amazing to be around Cleveland. My wife and I met at Case Western Reserve, and I was like, when? From the renovation of Playhouse Square, when we were dating, we actually, went to the Palace Theater when it was really in shambles. I mean, you looked up and you thought, is that plaster going to fall on my head? And to see it now, it's really remarkable. Next week's meeting will be Joel Alpert, president of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History.
Actually,
Exhibit director, sorry. going off the script here. George Snyder will be the host. There will be a board meeting after the club meeting this morning. And next week there will be a foundation board meeting, just to give everybody a heads up looking out. Thanks today to Jim Ahern and Liz Zupp for being the greeters. Audio-visual setup, Tom Page, Tom Tobin, and Jeff Tong, John Hairston, Den Rich, and Ron Barnhouse. And Bella Morale, again, thank you for being here and helping us. Bella's a service learning student from Hudson High School. And today's Rotabuck, I don't have the payout for today is $22. The jackpot, nobody's won in a while, $889. Chris, you would very popular guy. Last four, 4502. Oh no, that's you.
4502. Check it? We'll take your ticket. Oh, we'll take your ticket. Get it.
Indeed. That's it. Black marble's in there. I see it.
But no banana.
Okay, well, the jackpot continues to grow.
Oh, I'll take the envelope, though.
Yes, you will. There you go. Okay, board meeting in the gathering room.
Sorry, Joe.